I will hand over to the coordinator of our citizen science webinars, Jenny Barclay, who's our UK coordinator for our Quito team. So over to you, Jenny.
Hi, hello everybody. It's a real pleasure to chat to you all today and also to introduce some of the thinking from across the cities with citizen science. So citizen science was selected as one of the kind of cross-cutting hub themes. And what we want to do with these two seminars is understand how citizen science is being viewed across the hub, its purpose, and then what we would really like to do is to have a think about how we might work together across the cities to learn and improve on these processes. And I guess that's a little bit making the assumption that there is considerable value in working in and around citizen science in the context of disaster risk reduction. So I'm going to start off and I'm going to award myself a Hub Shiny, a gold star, for reminding us all that the mission of the Hub is to reduce future disaster risk, thinking particularly about the most vulnerable in tomorrow's cities, across our 4 cities. And really what we want to do is think about citizen science, what it is. It's different things to lots of people, so it's really important that we understand how it's being viewed across the cities, and think about how we might be able to use it to contribute to that. And think about whether we can create a common framework and use it to innovate across the cities. So today we're lucky enough that we've got some fantastic representatives from across each of the, I'm just checking the chat. Okay, fantastic. What we're going to do is we've got brilliant representatives from across each of the cities. We've got 2 people speaking from Kathmandu, and think about where each of the cities are working and how. And then one of the things I've set up as a mission impossible for Amy Donovan and Giuseppe Ferrino is to have a little bit of trying to do an initial mapping of these projects to ground something of a discussion. And the idea with that is we'll use what we do this week to meet again next week to think about how we can refine this, build on it, and maybe produce a cross-cities framework, and also use it to think further out than our own cities within the framework of the Hub, because we're of course interested much more broadly in disaster risk reduction. The outcome from all this, hopefully, is we'll maybe identify a cross-city working group on citizen science if we think it's needed and if it's beneficial. And ideally, we're going to produce a working paper, which if we manage to do that, we can award ourselves a platinum star for managing to do that sort of thing. And these are just 2 images. I thought it might be fun to just Google image citizen science and come up with some of these things that to kind of tell us a little bit about what people's perceptions are of citizen science. So let's see. Moving on, just a quick health warning. In Quito, almost one of our aims is to always post presentations in 2 languages. So some of the slides that I've used before talking to people in Quito about the work that we are doing appear in both English and Spanish. So what is citizen science? It can be broadly defined as the participation of people from outside professional organizations in the gathering or analysis of scientific data. And already when we start to think about it through the lens of our main goal in tomorrow's cities, we're kind of starting to move into interesting territory, because we've all heard Mark Pelling talking about the science, the research that we're doing. It's not necessarily restricted to the physical sciences and natural science data. So that's an interesting thing to think about in the context of this project. And the other thing, of course, is there'll be many social scientists here who are very well versed in the ideas around participatory techniques. And so what we have to do as a hub is we understand all sorts of different things that are enriching about the process of participation and co-production when it comes to research programs designed in this area. So we have to think really carefully about what participation is in this context. So even this simple definition becomes complex. And then there's many of you here who are already versed in citizen science. And of course, you understand that one of the things about the hub in general, but also citizen science processes in particular, is that the process of working together on understanding these problems together around the reduction of future risk, the process of doing that together is as important as the product. And we as researchers or risk managers stand to learn as much as the citizens with whom we participate. So this is just a little bit of two diagrams that kind of encapsulate some of the tensions that we have to resolve. And I guess my view about this is that if we want to innovate with the citizen science, they're not really tensions at all. One of the things that we have to do is just keep our mind open and think about all the different ways in which we're doing citizen science and how they compare, and understand the level of success they have against whatever it is we're trying to achieve with it. So the first of these is Arnstein's ladder of citizens' participation, which is from a very long time ago, 1971, almost around the time I was born. But it's a sort of seminal work from the social science tradition, which is thinking about normative calls really for kind of involving citizens in research. So that's kind of thinking towards the participatory end. And it's also often resulted in some of the critiques of citizen science when it's more natural science focused research. And then the second of these comes from well-known citizen science advocate Muki Hackley, which is trying to think about participation as it intersects with citizen science and the different levels in which citizens can engage. And I guess one of his premises is we don't always have to have that degree of participation in terms of decision-making, framework setting, as long as we understand from the start how it is that we're using the citizens. And I guess that's one of the things we want to think about with our projects. What way are we thinking about and regarding this? So are we just really interested in understanding physical hazard processes or multi-hazard processes, and therefore the citizens are useful sensors? Or are we really trying to do it to collaborate on defining problems together and gathering data? And that's what we're going to find out from our city representatives today. So all of this means that there's all sorts of reasons why, in the context of disaster risk reduction and engagement with the issues around that, you might not want to do citizen science. So I guess one of the things I would say is it's just as valid not to think this is a good vehicle for your research in the cities. It can be seen as extractive, it can be seen as exploitative of the citizens who participate, and it can actually take a very scientific, natural scientific or engineering scientific worldview of complex problems. And what we might do is throw the wrong variable out, if you like, in terms of thinking about it in the context of disaster risk. And one of the really interesting things when you start to burrow into this is, and this is something that some of our collaborators across the network have got more experience of, is that there is at the moment less evidence. There's a lot of evidence for it being great, but what is the evidence for how it works other than to generate instrumental data? And maybe that's okay as well. So on the converse, there's a lot of positives for why we should be considering citizen science, but perhaps why we should be really challenging ourselves with how we focus on this in the project. So some ideas about that is that citizen science is a fantastic mode of engagement. So where we actually manage to start valuing all sorts of different types of knowledge. Those of us who are researchers in academic institutions obviously strongly value that kind of knowledge, but practical everyday knowledge of the challenges. What is it that accumulates risk and causes these problems? And equally, those of you who are involved in risk management and city planning, you have lots of really great knowledge that relates to how to make this work in the context of thinking across very large scales. So the idea of citizen science is that by using this as a vehicle to work on a problem together, all of us feel equally engaged. The other thing is that once you start working in this integrated and engaged way, is that you actually start generating knowledge which is important to our problem or aim. And that's something I want everyone to really think about in terms of citizen science. And then I have to say that one of the other reasons is that sometimes it can be a fantastic and low-cost way to generate data that we might not otherwise get. And that is a valid reason to be doing citizen science too. And then finally, just a little reminder there about the process. So this is just a few diagrams. I think many of you here will see the different ways in which citizen science is thought of now in the context of disaster risk reduction. So thinking about gathering data about people's responses and experiences, for example, of earthquakes, participatory mapping, where people kind of map out the impacts of multiple hazards in their risk environment and talk about it in the context of every day. Some people might not recognize that as citizen science. Do we recognize that as something affiliated with it? Does that matter what we label it? And then also thinking about mapping and unusual ways of representing the environment, and also as a tool in some senses for communication. It can be very useful in that context too. This is a review that I was involved in that was done just a couple of years ago now, which reviewed as many case studies as we could of citizen science applied to disaster risk reduction. And the reason I'm showing you these two diagrams is because I want to tell you a little bit about the knowledge gap that I think there is with citizen science, and something that we could think about doing collectively across the cities in terms of doing better with this. So the first of these is just a slide tablet that represents proportionately what hazards people are typically looking at with these different projects. And you can see by far the most dominant are the post-hoc impacts of earthquakes happening and then flooding. But the thing I particularly want to draw your attention to is the way in which in a multi-hazard context, which is another one of our cross-city themes, there's very few projects that take a kind of holistic view of the impacts of hazards via citizen science. So that's a bit of a gap. And then this second graph basically just shows you the proportion of projects who are looking at stages in the disaster continuum. And one of the things is that citizen science is very strongly associated with the immediate aftermath of the disaster, and then also the early warning, so the immediate run up to something, a hazardous event happening. And one of the things I think we should challenge ourselves with is, well, can we do something a little bit more interesting by trying to think about which context of the disaster continuum is important and working with that in terms of thinking about planning it. So really the question is how do we use citizen science to avoid the accumulation of future risk? So pushing it beyond that idea of early warning and beyond the idea of kind of looking at the impacts of disasters in the aftermath, by which time it's too late. How do we embed it in a way that that kind of knowledge and learning comes together? So this is just my little diagram in terms of an appeal for perhaps how we would think about citizen science, which is kind of acknowledging that we don't necessarily have to start these projects where everybody is on board and agrees with exactly what it is that we're looking in. Someone can be allowed to be more of an expert. So for example, we have here an expert in hazard knowledge, and then we have a citizen who actually has lots and lots of knowledge about risks in the everyday. And then I guess the contention is that with the projects that we're doing, we're interested how much we're looking together at the process of working together, and how what that actually does is it integrates a far greater degree of local knowledge. And of course, the other person who is extremely important in this is the very dynamic knowledge that comes from the managers of risk. So by working together and integrating these knowledges, that's what the hope is that basically what we will be able to do is to do something much greater and something that speaks to improvements much more than just hazard knowledge. So we're going to hear from our four representatives from each of the cities now, starting out with Eser from Istanbul. And secretly in the background, well, not so secretly because I've just said they're doing it, Amy, Donovan and Giuseppe are going to do a bit of framework mapping. They're going to try and map across these projects to engender some discussion. So while we're doing this, it would be really fantastic to get questions in the chat. I'm going to ask Dave Lyons to save those questions for next week. But after each of the four people from the cities have talked, we'll have a quick plenary discussion to give Amy and Giuseppe a little bit of time before they present back some of the ideas and to have an initial look at that framework for how we're working together. So please, if there's anything that's not very clear, just pop some questions in the chat. And it's over to you now, Eser.
Thanks, Jenny. Hello, everyone. Let me share my screen. Can you all see my screen now? I think you can, right?
Yes.
Okay. So actually, Jenny, thank you for this introduction in great detail. You have, highlighted the difficulties that, or, the variety that exists in its definition, in the level of participation necessary, and also that it needs to be participatory, and also the problem or the best practices should not be hierarchical, actually. So this is just from our perspective, a citizen science ideally is a two-way path. So you provide something, and then you gather something, whether it's data, opinion, or any kind of information. And that the fact that it has to be two ways, I think it increases its efficiency. That's one thing I need to say. So there are different definitions out there. The first one is the involvement of the public in scientific research. This is from the website that I put over there. But also European Commission, or several sources actually, define citizen science as a process where different involvement at different levels is possible. So an engagement or a stakeholder meeting could also be taken as a citizen science activity if you look at that from that perspective. So there are many examples from the world, around the world, from my own bubble. Let me put it this way. I can give an example on earthquakes. This is an app we use at Candida, like EMSC application, or did you feel it, or things like that. So for example, for that particular one, what we do is we inform the users on the recent seismic activity, plus provide some information like past earthquake occurrences, like the historical seismicity at the location where those people are at that time, or fault information or things like that. If one wants to do so, then that person can provide us information on what they experienced after an earthquake. So if there is a damage of any kind, how did they, what was their level of perception and things like that. More recently, meaning in November, we added some additional forms on COVID-19, and actually this is inspired by this project. Starting, looking at the whole thing from the multi-hazard perspective, and also realizing, that the earthquake occurred at the time where the, cases were in rise at the time in Izmir. So we have added form and started to ask people to provide us feedback about what they have experienced in that period, on top of the earthquake hazard that they have experienced. So as a generally what I can see is that such applications or programs definitely have a great potential in conveying the public what to do, not to do at times of crisis, but also for risk reduction. And then from another perspective, the Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality is also working on something like this. This is another example. This is our initial design or conceptual design of our RAD-DSE. So as you see, it has several inputs and units and details, but I'd like to draw your attention to here, where we address communities. So this is again designed and then under development, but we have a special area for that where we will consider putting or we will create an area for further ideas. The status in Istanbul, considering, well, from the perspective of citizen science, is the following. In the original plan, we have no plan actually for under the exact name of citizen science, but yet several elements of our work definitely involve activities which could be accepted under as, for example, a few examples: household survey, in which people or individual experiences about multi-hazards or about their physical and socioeconomic vulnerabilities. We are carrying out some online survey for targeted stakeholder groups and then ask them to provide information on several things. One example is the group on risk communication, which is developing really, really well. They provide us, at the same time, they provide us feedback on understanding problems, identifying gaps, in addition to those online survey. As I've just shown you under the RAD-DSE, we include communities as an audience, and then we are working on details, how it can be used in a more effective way. Another activity that could be, taken as the citizen science concept is the virtual reality prototype. So it's already developed, and actually it can be customized with regard to style of the city and to different hazard types. And then if designed in that way, it could be an interesting tool for gathering responses, or the type of responses from the users, actually. And also another activity that we are very keen on is the exhibitions. And then from that perspective, we really, we follow Quito's activities, because this is something that we find very valuable. There are some ideas under discussion in the Istanbul hub. For example, one idea is involving muhtars. So these are the leads of the smallest administrative unit in Turkey. These people are like semi-official, and then they are very influential on local communities. So from the risk reduction or education or communication perspective, they are the ideal personalities for reaching out. And collaboration, in that sense, collaborations with NGOs become important. We have identified two of them, Ahder and MAK. Ahder is a society for earthquake preparation and education. The other one, MAK, that is the Foundation or Association for District Volunteers. So we are willing to do more and open to ideas and inspirations from other cities, and a big yes to a working paper from Istanbul. Thank you for listening. That's all from me.
Thank you very much, Esther. So Esther has to go, but she says there's other people in the team who can probably answer questions in plenary, but please feel free to put questions in the chat. Next up, we have Maria Isabel Couperin, who's one of the researchers from Quito, to tell us about what's going on in Quito.
Hello, everyone. I share my presentation. Can you see?
Yes. Perfect. Thank you, Marisa.
Okay. My name is Maria Isabel Couperin. I am geologist engineering at Escuela Politécnica Nacional. I am going to talk about citizen science in Quito. We are produce knowledge with all participants between the knowledge for the researchers and the local people. It's a highly participatory process where the researchers participants are involving in several aspects of the citizen science. This process applies in different scales and cross scales as case studies through small projects. We are working at the city level to collect institutional aspect on the Quito Hub, and together to work with museums, high schools, and policymakers such as a municipality in Quito. At level of participation in citizen science, we are ideally at level 3, participatory science. So the researchers participate and contribute to define the problem and collecting the data about it. And we are expected to level 4. Our framework include starting with an entry point. We meet and work with the communities and identify their problems can be solved with citizen science activities. After that, the participatory process continue when we are exchanging the knowledge with them, and we improve our and their knowledge, integrating with use the sensors. This participatory process has a goal is it is reach the benefit for participants in terms improving their lives, adopting a proactive posture, multi-hazard risk reduction. And this process is very reflexive and can be represent many challenges and changes around the time. With our framework, I share with you an example that we are developing in one of case study. It is a plan for San Luis de Miravalle. After the initial contact with the communities, they were explicit as to technical assistance for closure septic tanks. During the initial process with the communities, we can identify other problems related with water. Therefore, we are beginning to build a wider methodology with the sensor use for water management. The idea is to include some activities that allows understanding the landslide and mud flows, soil stability, moisture, and punctual activity performed by the communities, for example, cleaning of waters. The impact that we want to reach is improving the capacities of managing the water in make visible their voices and local knowledge. And with it, contribute to reduce the multi-hazard risk. In this slide, you can see two pictures in San Luis de Miravalle. In the first, can see the septic tank. It is fully. In the second picture, you can note the house are not connected to the public server. So it discharges into the septic tank located in the slope. It is produce some problems as moisture and instability in the soils, generating mud flows in winter and diseases. Finally, I share with you some ideas about the sensors could be implemented in Quito. These sensors, seismic and moisture sensors, allow to obtain data to understand better the multi-hazard scenarios and can be useful for the communities. It's all. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Marisa. That was a fantastic insight using one specific example to illustrate the kind of general framework that you're taking with Quito. That's fantastic. Now we are lucky enough from Practical Action to have Dharam Upreti and then followed by his colleague Binod Parajuli to come and tell us on our round the world citizen science trip about Kathmandu.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you very much. So let me start what we are doing actually in Nepal in relation to citizen science, mainly in disaster risk reduction and resilience building. So we are focusing on like flood, early warning system, and landslide risk management in a different area. And Nepal is a kind of laboratory for bringing local knowledge, local perspective, engaging citizens, not only collection of the information, but also validating those information from the local knowledge, local wisdom in those sectors. So my colleague actually, Binod Parajuli, who has worked on it in the ground, and recently we have published some papers on this. He will continue some, and then I'll add the perspective in early warning system in the later stage. Binod, over to you.
Thank you, Dharam sir. Hi, everyone. Nice to be here and presenting some of our learning from citizen science project we have from our organization. So I think Jenny has rightly defined the terminology. So I won't be going on the detail about the terminology, but I just wanted to say that the citizen science approach has gained very significant momentum in recent years and have been used in both natural and social kind of research. And in our context, if you see in mostly in developing countries, this has been very useful to generate new data because we are a bit data scarce region. So I think this has a lot of potential in moving forward. So can you go to next slide, sir? Can I share my screen so it will be easier for me, if that's okay? I have ready.
Yeah, just go on.
Okay.
I'll continue. No
Okay,
worry.
so as part of this, we have the Citizen Science in School project. It's a part of a landslide EBO project funded by Science for Humanitarian Emergencies and Resilience. And it's actually led by Imperial College London. So here what we are doing is we are basically training students to collect rainfall related data and also use these data to get some insight on how there's a correlation between landslide and water. So in the picture, if you see the first picture shows about a small curricula that we developed to train our students in the remotest part of Nepal. And in the second picture, you can see some researchers. They came all the way from London and Wageningen and some of the other parts of the world, and they actually trained these people about how to measure rainfall and how can these trees can give some signs about landslide. For example, inclination of tree through dendrology can provide some kind of information. So these were disseminated at the ground level in the schools. So can you just click next, sir? Yeah, this is the students. They are practicing very basic method of rainfall measurement using measuring cylinders. So what we have basically done is we have provided these cylinders to each students, and we also have a small network of low cost sensors installed in nearby places, and these data were later kind of made contrast between students collected data and census collected data. Next, sir. Yeah, and as part of the same project, we had this collaborative mapping with citizen scientists. Here, we basically utilized the platform called OpenStreetMap. So what we have done is we asked support from volunteer mappers who are actually good mappers, but they came forward to volunteer. They mapped through remote mapping using aerial imageries of the two districts we have selected in the region. So during which we have mapped key landmarks, including roads, river, building, forest area, trails, and open spaces. So basically, we mapped everything we saw, and we thought what it is. So yeah, next please, sir. Yeah, then what we did was we trained around 43 participants. They are actually local people, including government officials, students, teachers, and community people who are a bit at least literate about mapping. So we trained them for 4 days using these PowerPoint slides and hands-on experience. And later what we did was we mobilized them in collecting ground-based data. So later these ground-based data were used to validate the remote mapping. We could not do whole of the district mapped from the ground because of the time constraint and resource. But what we did was we selected a portion of the study area which was earlier mapped through remote mapping, and we did the validation through citizen scientists. So next. So these are the total changes made. So we mapped around 24,704 buildings and 209 kilometers of road. So the total mapping was as shown in the figure. So it's basically the demonstration of what has been done. So next, sir. Yeah, next again. Yeah, this is basically a map. It's a very simple map prepared by the data. using what has come from citizen scientists and remotely mapped data. So what we actually did was we pulled all the OSM data to GIS and made a simple map that is understandable to local communities. So next, please. So this is a similar map for another municipality. We actually worked in 2 municipalities. So next. It's basically shows how it looks, because that was in a bit coarse resolution and you cannot see all the places. So it shows the key attributes that were mapped. So yeah, next. So, and also as part of Zurich Flood Resilience Project, we have been working with the local communities in flood-prone areas of Nepal in 3 major municipalities, where we started working in OpenStreet mapping back in 2014. And if you see these 3 simple maps, they are basically the OSM maps that were created using the data collected by communities and citizen scientists itself. So it's basically that they provided the information, we trained them first, we oriented them, and we increased some kind of digital literacy, and they mapped whole the area and we packaged it. Yeah.
And this is how we are collecting information from the ground, and how ground gaze readers actually bring information from the ground and then feed those information into the system, so that the government actually then disseminate the information from the server to the entire risk exposed communities through different media like web server and mobile SMS and other the bulletins. So this is how the ground information is validated by the both scientific information through the radar system, and whether radar system work well or not, that are actually validated by the community-based gaze readers. So this is all about the system, how science and the citizen science actually connect to each other. That is what the slide said.
So we had some of the learning from all of what we have been presenting in previous slide. So as rightly mentioned by Jenny and previous speaker, citizen science approach envisions community as a knowledge co-producer rather than end users only. And it also helps generate a need-based database, so we can identify what is actually needed in the ground, in the forehand, when we kind of have extreme level of citizen scientist engagement. So we just not go there and conduct our citizen science project, but also understand their actual needs. And it's also good that through this approach, local capacity building is in the core of this concept. So the sum of the capacity, although not all the capacity are transformable, because some of the things are technical, but some of the capacity, technical capacity, are transferred to the local unit. And it's a mutual benefit to researcher and also for the communities, because there are a lot of things which outsiders may not know, and these local people are very familiar with their geography and context. These are some of the publications that we had as part of our work. If you like to know more about some of the work we have presented, we'd be happy to provide more detail. And thank you for this opportunity to present.
Thank you very much.
Thank you both. That was really fantastic to hear some of the lessons that you have learned before in Kathmandu. So we're going to finish our round the world journey, and I can see the chat has lit up. So hopefully we'll have enough time at the end to have a bit of an initial conversation and see how we think the mapping of these relative to some of this commentary that's happening too. And I can see Sangeeta's putting some comments, extra comments into the chat as well. So absolutely last, but by no means least, we're ending our journey in Nairobi, and we're lucky enough Charles Tanui is going to talk to us about plans there.
Yes, thank you, Jenny. Can I come in? Okay. Hope I'm audible. Let me share my screen. Yes, thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. I'm Charles Tanui. I'm a research fellow at the African Center for Technology Studies. and I'm a disaster risk policy analyst under the Tomorrow Cities Supported Nairobi Risk App. So in this presentation, I'm going to share especially the case of bringing in the community to really participate in scientific work, especially in Nairobi City. And we're actually utilizing especially the impact pathway where we are trying to really engage with the local communities. So one of the key lessons, and of course, what we're pursuing is actually co-creating scientific knowledge on disaster risks, especially hazard risks, especially within the Nairobi and especially the informal settlements. So what the modelers have done so far, we are trying to bridge, especially using the citizen science to connect, link the social science, physical science, and the communities, and especially the urban poor and the policymakers. And preliminary studies is that the floods and fires are very common hazards within Nairobi. And what you're trying so far is especially having a dialogue with the modelers and the team to look at how can we transition this one now to trigger kind of discussion and dialogue with the communities within Nairobi, and especially to share their knowledge and indigenous knowledge, if any. So one of the key lessons that we learned yesterday in one of the community engagement dialogues, one of the youth called Nelson Newson from Mukuru. Mukuru is one of the slums we are focusing on as for impact in Nairobi. And what he said, and he emphasized during his closing remark, that people want to own response to hazard, risk, and disasters. So for us, we are thinking that we want to bring them on board to participate, but already they've got that knowledge that they really need to be engaged. They need to be recognized when you're responding to fires, to floods. But then at this particular juncture, based on the preliminary studies, is that we are not sufficiently strong in terms of engaging them, both at the policy level, different stakeholders. But what have we done? So first was, we wanted to understand who is who within and among the urban poor. So we mapped community-based organizations and identify some of the community disaster risk leaders. And then we did engage them in terms of what are their level of involvement in disaster risks within Nairobi. And if you look at these particular graphs on the left side, you realize that those who are engaging at a very high level are actually in a small number. You see the percentage is 10 among the targeted, which we mapped was one actual number was 150. But then when we did ask, so how many CPOs have strong relationship with the county government of Nairobi? And you realize that in the average, in terms of performance, who say do have very good, having strong relationship, especially if you look at the graph on the right, it's a small number. It was less than 5%. So that one tells us as scientists that there is an opportunity to bring on board different stakeholders, especially the urban poor, to participate in this study. So we did, when we went further in terms of now co-designing community dialogues and engagement framework. And yesterday was the third community dialogue, in where we have managed to reach among the CPOs and leaders. We have reached 20 whom we have brought on board to really engage proactively, and they've expressed their perception and also the understanding the need to really be involved in this kind of study. And one of the findings is that, of course, there is low awareness of the risk, especially in the context of multi-hazard risk. They really emphasize that, of course, for them, they are responding to individual hazard risks within the city. But when they are really, especially the transition phase from floods to fires to different risks within the city, they feel that they really don't have sufficient knowledge and they get overwhelmed because they are mostly responding from the emergency perspective. And of course, this kind of dialogues is really supporting building the strong relationship and linkage, especially among the researchers and the community leaders. And of course, we are trying to really identify the champions so that we can really take them through customized trainings, which have actually they've requested. So what we are actually also doing is we are inviting up researchers to join either passively or actively. We want to use especially the Nairobi engagement with the urban poor to really look at how can you bring in the scientists, not only in Nairobi, but also across the different hubs and across the world, to really engage with them, to dialogue with them, and really inform their processes. And of course, I and Mark Pelling and a number of colleagues, we are leading the sub-working group on community engagement, and we'd like to see how are we using the citizen science to scale up, especially the knowledge from the local communities. So the next step that you're really trying to really use the citizen science to work for the, especially Nairobi hub, is to take the modelers to the community level, to really engage in facilitating participatory modeling. And one of our modelers is Aaron Nakala, was in Mukuru slum, engaging the community-based organizations with the Kenya Red Cross in terms of data collection, trying to understand what has been really happening in terms of responding to different hazard risks. So what are some of the lessons that we have learned, especially as we use the citizen science to fast track, especially the uptake, seeking volunteership among the different stakeholders to engage in terms of sharing data, leveraging the lessons, engaging in policy dialogue, and of course the implementation is that citizen science is facilitating researchers to understand the context and strengthen the relationships with the targeted and audience, and of course communities. And then also citizen science is very potential in terms of enhancing participation of communities, and especially the urban poor, and especially the leaders and different stakeholders, because the researchers then to really create that space and give the voice, and of course participate in terms of amplifying the voices of the urban poor, and also of course knowing also what is happening at the policy level. The third last is citizen science facilitate understanding, especially the capacity needs of the urban poor. It's not quite easy. Like when we were engaging yesterday, we realized that we are kind of, even though we are using the risk lens, they've got other things which are priority, but then how can we treat especially those priorities so that we don't lose focus especially of the objective and the vision of the hub. So it's really good to really get to understand and really design trainings that are focusing on their capacity needs. And of course, citizen science potentially strengthen the local systems as a way of strengthening co-creation, because this one, you bring in the local communities and the different stakeholders, especially to volunteer, to really engage in a way that they own the process. And this one helped us in terms of answering, especially what Nelson did mention yesterday, that the urban poor, they're really waiting for you to involve them in all these processes, from the research to response to the different risks. And of course, lastly, especially citizen science in the role of policy, is that it's supporting especially the scale up of community knowledge into the informal plans, especially for Nairobi and Mukuru slums initiative. We have got what you call special planning areas being implemented now. And what they were saying yesterday is that they've got the opportunity to really shape the implementation of the recommendations within the SPA process. And of course, those who are coming in from the other informal settlements who have been gazetted to be developed under the SPA process, is that they'll be in a position to influence, and of course, the overall city policy framework. So we are really inviting all of you to really especially engage with us as we engage the local communities, and of course, different stakeholders, either as passive or active researchers and stakeholders. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Charles. Thank you very much for that. I don't know about you, but this is kind of how I feel by these presentations, and also the chat itself is a hazard because it's on fire. So there's lots of really, really interesting comments that people have made. Now, as I said at the beginning, we just have 10 minutes left. We have next week to really lighten up this discussion. So we're going to kind of take some of the key themes that have emerged and do this. But I wonder if the speakers from each of the cities could maybe turn their cameras back on, because what I'm going to do is give Amy and Giuseppe 5 or 10 minutes to finish a mapping. Now, some of the key themes that have emerged from the chat is this issue of empowerment versus knowledge generation, and then also thinking about using it to create both horizontal linkages between people at the same level in the communities, but also across the communities and with risk managers. So I have asked Amy and Giuseppe to map out your discussion in terms of where we think we're sitting there, and they'll show us this right at the end, and hopefully that's going to be our starting point for next week. But I think early on, Mark asked the question really about thinking about impact defined by local partners for the risk as they're experiencing it in place. And then John asked a specific question of Dharam and Binod in terms of Kathmandu, with all this rich learning that you have about this issue of landslides and engagements. How do you see a really useful use of citizen science in Kathmandu, in the hub, in the next few years?
Yeah. Should I answer now, Jenny?
Yes, please, if you can, just in a few minutes.
Yeah, definitely. I had shared a kind of concept note to Hugh, Kathmandu coordinator, about how we can use the citizen science in measuring the flood data, because in flood we are actually striving having those like high resolution data, hourly and sub-hourly data that we yet to get. Even there is no system to store sub-hourly data in the DHMC, Department of Hydrology, Meteorology. Then if we have like those, if we could mobilize citizens in our working area, those who could just take their mobile phone and go to the riverside, in the bank of the river, and then they could just easily collect those information and put it into the system. There is a apps that some agency in Switzerland has developed and would like to work with us. I mean, that is an example how we could measure the flood data. And then because this tomorrow city is the combination of physical science and social science, definitely, in a social science research, we actually provide space to the local citizens, ward level disaster management committee, to engage in collecting of the perception based risk data to the scientist. And then we could combine those and verify those with the physical science findings, and then combine the methodology to make a kind of comprehensive methodology for risk reduction for Kathmandu. And we could then influence to the decision makers. Okay, this is what we collected the data using the social science, and then verify those with help of physical science, and this is the comprehensive. So this is an example that we could make.
That's fantastic. That's great. I wonder if I could ask that question of Marisa and Charles as well. Is thinking about this tension between data collection to understand hazards, working about and kind of tensioning it with trying to not create future risks, so working for empowerment and working on problems that citizens are interested in. How do you see that in Nairobi and Quito, Marisa? We'll start with Charles.
Come back again. I didn't catch you well, Jenny.
So how do you see the tension between empowerment of citizens through citizen science versus gathering new data about hazardous processes? And this thought that has emerged in the chat about the importance of then understanding the citizens themselves. How do you see that working in Nairobi?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think there's an internet interruption, but if I caught it, is that you mentioned that the citizen science in data collection.
Yes. Where do you think how do you see the tension between empowerment, the process of empowerment via citizen science, versus a desire and a need to understand the hazards better?
Yeah, I think for the case of Nairobi, how we have actually start with how we have tried to utilize, especially the citizen science, is first is appreciating the up and poor. They've got some knowledge, and what we are trying, and especially researchers, is to express themselves in such a way that they play the role of either complementing, rather than replacing. Because that is what is emerging, especially from these community engagements, is that, of course, there have been research which have been done before, But like this, especially for the case when COVID came, it disrupted different systems. One of the community leaders yesterday talked about the food insecurity, which was kind of enhanced last year due to COVID. So they were anticipating that, especially response to floods, which we are anticipating in Nairobi in the month of March. Then their involvement, especially in the sharing of data and analysis, is very important, so that when you are generating the solutions, they already own it now, especially the response. Let's say if the community fire champions, when they are responding to the different fire hazards within Nairobi, they know the scale. They can really plan very well and operationalize the different city policies. So what the citizen science has actually supported us is that first is that how we treat the community, we need to be very strategic, and then also appreciating the knowledge that emanates from them, and also integrating the views from different stakeholders. And then again, what is the kind of, we need to evaluate the impact of the knowledge that we are generating. Like if fire modelers say, like for instance, one of the informal settlement where called Mukuru, where we are focusing on, they're implementing the special planning area plan. If you say they are going to experience the flooding to this kind of scale, how will the informal groups and formal groups treat that kind of message? Some, they would like the place to be retained that way. Some want to allocate resources to one part of the settlement than the other one. So they raise the question about the policies and politics and community engagement. So we need to be very sensitive in terms of information that we are really packaging for sharing with the stakeholders. Thank you.
Fantastic. It's really great to hear about these two other prospects. Marisa, I wonder if you want to say a few words about this tension in Quito. You obviously gave us a case study, but if you want to say more.
Yeah, for example, in San Luis de Miravalle, we start with a drone mapping exercise, and we work with the community, and they draw some events as smooth flows or landslides on the map, and give us information about their experience of risk. This information is then integrated into the models. For example, Jerry work with the mud flows. He used the community information and then create the model that we use for explain the people your experience of risk with the model in the second step.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks very much. So I have to say, I've been absolutely amazed at the richness of the discussion. We're going to save the chat and do a bit of analysis and try and use that to structure the conversation, which we will give you some information about with the sign up for next week. But just before we finish, let's see how Amy or Giuseppe have got on with their mapping of our discussion.
Sorry, I will present very, I don't know if I can share my screen, but very quickly. I don't know if you can see it. It's just, I don't know, yes. I think that Jenny was doing structuring a PowerPoint, asking several things for mapping out the presentations by today. I think that in the first slide here, in a scale of no co-benefits at the beginning and co-benefits for all at the beginning, we are in a sort of a middle scale. So the citizen science methods are designed by the researchers very often together with the community. So we can say we are in between the stage 2 and the stage 3, probably with Quito that is a little bit more goes a little bit more in depth in the community. But I can say that we are all between 2 and 3. And interestingly, I think that there is this tension to move forward towards a whole participation of communities and other stakeholders in the citizen science. In terms of the triangle, again, I think that there are some, well, we think that there are some differences between the cities, or better, there are some differences in the starting point. However, all the cities try to converge, let's say, between the middle of the triangle, where the final goal of the citizen science is to equalize knowledge between, let's say, the expert knowledge and the community knowledge, to generate a new multi-hazard knowledge, and to generate horizontal and vertical linkages for risk reduction. So the knowledge from the top and the knowledge from bottom up that try to converge in the middle. And I think that what Emi has done here brilliantly explains what this tension between the equilibria across the three corners of the triangle. Okay, here is a little bit more complicated, and we need to put order, we need to design better this. But anyway, in terms of the starting point, I think that we think that, let's say, all the cities start with some targeted communities. So if you see, for example, this word here, if we assign a color to each city, all the cities have targeted communities. Some of them work more in a multidisciplinary way, some others in a more in an interdisciplinary way, at the scale of community, but also with other stakeholders from the city. And the aspiration for the end, for sure, is to work with the targeted community, but also to include the city and also other local stakeholders, such as NGOs and disaster risk management practitioners. So it's a variegated landscape, and we need to work a little bit on it. But yeah, thank you very much. That's all for the moment. Thanks.
Okay, everyone, I've been told that we need to stick very strictly to 2 o'clock finish for this. So hopefully we can pick up these discussions next week. As I said, we're going to share everything that's in the chat. Both of us have appealed. I already see that you missed out the museums and the publics in Quito, so we need to add that one in. So I'm very excited to pick up this conversation. There's been some really useful stuff about empowerment, about the need for the integration of data, about communication and understanding of the communities that we're working with, but also the absolutely critical involvement of city managers and planners. So thank you all. Have a really good afternoon, evening, morning. And I really look forward to seeing you next week. And thank you so much to all the speakers who did such a fantastic job of integrating all the work. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.